The courtroom went completely silent when my son stood up and pointed at me. "Your Honor, my mother has no legal right to remain in that house." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own son, the boy I had raised, the boy whose first school uniform I had sewn by hand. Now he was standing in court, asking a judge to take away the home where I had lived for almost 30 years. I looked at him. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He didn't look at me. Instead, he turned toward the judge. "My mother is occupying property that legally belongs to me." My hands began to tremble. That house wasn't just a building. It was the home my husband and I had saved for years to buy. The home where Ethan had grown up. The home where we had celebrated birthdays, holidays, and every important family moment. After my husband died, it was the only place that still felt like him. And now my son wanted it. The judge looked at the documents in front of him. "Mr. Carter, you're claiming full ownership?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And your mother has no ownership interest?" "That is correct." I stared at the papers. Something was terribly wrong, because I knew exactly what the original property documents said. The house belonged to me. At least that's what my husband had always told me. The judge turned toward my attorney. "Ms. Eleanor, do you have evidence supporting your claim?" My attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor." She placed a folder on the table. But before she could open it, Ethan's lawyer interrupted. "Your Honor, the documents my client submitted clearly establish that the property was transferred to him several years ago." "Transferred?" I felt my stomach drop. I turned toward Ethan. "You told me those papers were for the bank." He finally looked at me. "Mom, you lied to me." He looked away again. The judge raised his hand. "Enough." Everyone became silent. The judge examined the documents carefully. Then he asked Ethan, "When exactly did your mother transfer this property to you?" Ethan answered, 3 years ago." I almost laughed. 3 years ago, my husband had already been gone for 2 years. And I remembered that period clearly. I had been struggling with grief. Ethan had helped me organize paperwork. He had told me there were documents that needed my signature. I had trusted him. I had signed what he put in front of me, but I had never knowingly signed away my home. My attorney leaned toward me. "Did you sign these documents?" I looked at the signature. It looked like mine. "Yes." She asked, "Do you remember signing a property transfer?" "No." "Did your son explain what you were signing?" I looked at Ethan. "No." The courtroom became silent again. My attorney turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, we believe my client's signature was obtained under false pretenses." Ethan's lawyer immediately objected. "Speculation." The judge nodded. "Objection sustained." My attorney sat down. I looked at Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than the lawsuit. I whispered, "Why would you do this?" He finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was frightened. And somehow that frightened me even more. The judge looked over the documents again. Then he asked, "Mr. Carter, where is the original deed?" Ethan's lawyer answered, "The original is currently unavailable." The judge frowned. "Unavailable?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Why?" There was a pause. Then the lawyer said, "We believe it was misplaced." My attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor, that's precisely the issue." The judge looked at her. She opened another folder. "We have a certified copy of the original deed from the county records." Ethan's face changed. I noticed. My attorney placed the document before the judge. The judge read it carefully. Then he looked up. "This document doesn't show a transfer to the defendant." Ethan's lawyer became nervous. "Your Honor, there may have been a later amendment." "Where is that amendment?" "We're attempting to obtain it." The judge stared at him. Then he looked at Ethan. "Mr. Carter, You brought this case before the court claiming this house belongs to you. Yes, Your Honor. Then why don't you have the original document proving it? Ethan said nothing. I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe my son had made a terrible mistake. Maybe the truth would finally come out. But then Ethan's lawyer pulled another document from his briefcase. This is the amendment, Your Honor. He handed it to the judge. The judge examined it. My heart sank when I saw my signature again. The lawyer said, "This document clearly establishes the transfer." I looked at my attorney. She was staring at the page. Then she leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't worry." "Why?" She pointed at the bottom of the document. "Look at the date." I looked. My blood ran cold. The date was April 17th. I remembered that day. I had been at my husband's grave, because it was the anniversary of his death. I had been there from morning until late afternoon. I couldn't possibly have signed a property transfer at the office listed on the document. My attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, we have a problem." The judge looked at her. She held up the document. My client could not have signed this document at the stated location. Ethan's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, my client was not there." The judge raised his hand. "Let her finish." My attorney continued. "We have cemetery records, a visitor log, and a photograph time-stamped that afternoon." Ethan stared at the document. For the first time, he looked genuinely scared. The judge looked at him, then at the document, then back at my son. And finally, he asked the question that would change everything. For several seconds, Ethan didn't answer. The courtroom was completely silent. The judge looked at him again. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan swallowed. I don't know." My attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor, we believe this document may have been falsified." Ethan's lawyer objected. "That's an accusation without evidence." My attorney calmly opened another folder. "Then let's examine the evidence." She placed 3 documents on the table. The first was the alleged property transfer. The second was the county record showing the original ownership. The third was a certified visitor log from the cemetery. She pointed to the date. On April 17th, my client was at her husband's gravesite from 10:14 a.m. until 4:37 p.m. The judge looked at the documents. "And the property transfer was supposedly signed at 1:20 p.m.? "Yes, Your Honor." My attorney nodded. Approximately 3 hours after my client arrived at the cemetery, Ethan's lawyer looked uncomfortable. The judge turned toward Ethan. "Were you aware your mother was at the cemetery that day?" Ethan looked down. "Yes." My heart sank. "You knew?" He nodded. "You knew I was there all day?" "Yes." "Then why did you use that date?" He didn't answer. His lawyer whispered something to him. The judge noticed. "Mr. Carter, I asked you a question." Ethan finally looked up. "I didn't choose the date." "Who did?" Silence. The judge leaned back. "Your attorney has submitted this document as evidence. You are responsible for the claim." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I thought it was legitimate." I stared at him. "You thought?" His eyes met mine. "Mom, I didn't know." I felt tears forming. "Then why did you take me to court?" He looked away. "I thought Dad left the house to me." "Your father never told you that." "He told me things." "What things?" Ethan became quiet. My attorney stepped in. "Your Honor, may I ask the defendant a few questions?" The judge nodded. She turned toward Ethan. "Who gave you the document?" Ethan hesitated. "My uncle." I felt a chill. "Robert." He nodded. "My husband's younger brother." Robert had been around our family for years. He had helped Ethan with his first business. He had attended my husband's funeral. He had even visited me after my husband died. I couldn't understand. Why would Robert have a property document? Ethan's answer was quiet. Because Dad gave him access to some of the family records. My attorney looked at me. Did your husband ever tell you that? No. She turned back to Ethan. Did Robert tell you your mother had transferred the house to you? Yes. When? About a year ago. And did you verify it with the county? No. Why not? Ethan looked embarrassed. Because I trusted him. The words hurt. I almost said, just like I trusted you. But I stayed quiet. Then my attorney asked something unexpected. Mr. Carter, how much did your uncle promise you? Ethan froze. My heart started beating faster. What does that mean? He didn't answer. My attorney repeated the question. How much money did Robert promise you if you won this case? Ethan's lawyer immediately objected. Your Honor. The judge looked at my attorney. Do you have evidence? Yes. She pulled out a bank statement. There was a transfer of $15,000 to my client's son's account 3 weeks before this lawsuit was filed. I looked at Ethan. $15,000? He closed his eyes. Couldn't believe it. Ethan, he finally whispered. It wasn't payment. Then what was it? A loan. From Robert. Yes. For what? He didn't answer. The judge looked at him. Mr. Carter, this court needs the truth. Ethan took a deep breath. I had debts. What kind? Business debts. I stared at him. How much? He said nothing. My attorney answered for him. Approximately $48,000. The room went silent. Suddenly everything made sense. My son wasn't simply trying to take my house. He was desperate. And someone had convinced him that the house was his way out. But there was still one thing I couldn't understand. Why would Robert help him? The judge asked. Did your uncle tell you that the house could be sold to repay your debts? Ethan nodded. Yes. I closed my eyes. That house wasn't just worth money. It was the last thing my husband had left me. Ethan knew that. He had grown up there. He knew every room, every photograph, every memory, and yet he had allowed someone to convince him that it was simply an asset. My attorney wasn't finished. Your Honor, we'd like to call a witness. The judge nodded. Who? A former employee of the law office listed on the transfer document. A middle-aged man walked into the courtroom. He took the stand. The judge asked him to identify himself. My name is Daniel Harris. I worked at Carter Mills for 12 years. My attorney handed him the document. Mr. Harris, do you recognize this? He looked at it. Yes. Was this document created in your office? No. Ethan's lawyer stood. Objection. The judge allowed the witness to continue. Daniel pointed to the document. The letterhead is wrong. My attorney asked, what do you mean? Our office changed its letterhead 5 years ago. But this document claims to have been created 3 years ago. Yes. He looked closer. And the notary stamp is also wrong. My heart began pounding. My attorney turned to the judge. Your Honor, this document isn't merely questionable. She looked at Ethan. It appears to be a complete forgery. Ethan looked stunned. But then Daniel Harris said something that made everyone in the courtroom go silent. There is one more thing. The judge looked at him. What? Daniel pointed at the signature. That isn't the only problem. My attorney asked, what else? Daniel looked directly at Ethan. Your mother's signature wasn't copied from a property document. He paused. It was copied from something else. I leaned forward. From what? Daniel looked at me. From a document your husband signed shortly before he died. My heart stopped. My husband? What document? Daniel hesitated. Then he said, his final will. And suddenly, I understood why someone had gone to such extraordinary lengths to make me believe I had given my house to my son. because the Real document contained something Ethan had never been told. Mr. Carter, if your mother didn't sign this document, whose signature is this? The courtroom went silent after Daniel mentioned my husband's final will. I looked at Ethan. He looked just as shocked as I felt. My husband's will? I asked. Daniel nodded. The signature on the fake property transfer appears to have been copied from the signature on your husband's final will. My attorney immediately asked, "Where is that will?" Daniel looked toward the judge. "The original should be with the attorney who prepared it." The judge turned to Ethan. "Did you ever see your father's final will?" Ethan shook his head. "No." I felt a strange ache in my chest. My husband had always been private about legal matters. After his death, I thought I had received everything he wanted me to have. Apparently, I had never seen the complete document. My attorney looked at me. "Did you receive a copy of your husband's final will?" "I received a copy of what I thought was the final version." Daniel spoke again. "That may not have been the final version." I turned toward him. "What are you saying?" He explained that my husband had changed his will only weeks before his death. The newer version had been kept separately, and according to Daniel, someone had tried to prevent it from being found. The judge asked, "Who prepared the revised will?" Daniel gave the name of a law firm. My attorney immediately recognized it. "They still operate." The judge nodded. "Then I suggest you obtain the original." My attorney said, "We already have someone contacting them." Ethan suddenly spoke. "Mom." I looked at him. "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "Not here. I need to tell you something." The judge allowed him to continue. Ethan took a breath. "Uncle Robert told me Dad left the house to me." I stared at him. "He said Dad changed his mind before he died." "And you believed him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because Robert showed me an old letter from Dad." "What letter?" Ethan's face tightened. "It said Dad wanted me to have the house." My attorney immediately asked, "Do you still have that letter?" "Yes." "Where?" "At home." The judge looked at my attorney. "Can you obtain it?" "Yes, Your Honor." Ethan looked at me. I thought I was doing what Dad wanted. I believed him. That was the hardest part. I could see the regret on his face. He wasn't looking at me like an enemy anymore. He looked like my son again. But there was still a question. Why would Robert lie to him? The answer came later that afternoon. My attorney called. "We found the original will." I couldn't speak. She continued, "And Eleanor." "What?" "You need to sit down." I sat. "The house was never left to Ethan." I closed my eyes. "I knew it." "No." Her voice became serious. "It's more complicated than that." She explained that my husband had left the house to me. But there was a condition that completely changed the situation. "What condition?" "He specifically wrote that the property could not be transferred or sold without your written consent." I felt tears come to my eyes. My husband had protected me, even after he was gone. But then my attorney said something that shocked me. "There is also a second beneficiary." "Who?" She paused. "Ethan." I was confused. "How?" "He receives the property after your death." I stared at the wall. Suddenly, the entire scheme made sense. Ethan didn't need to take the house now. If he simply waited, it would eventually become his. So why had he taken me to court? Because someone had convinced him that he could get it early. My attorney continued, "There is one more condition." "What?" "If anyone attempts to transfer the property through fraud, the entire inheritance clause is cancelled." I felt my heart stop. So if Ethan participated in the forgery, he could lose his future inheritance. Couldn't believe it. The very people promising Ethan the house had put his inheritance at risk. And there was still more. My attorney told me that the $15,000 Robert gave Ethan wasn't really a loan. It was an advance. An advance against the money Robert expected to make from selling the property. I looked at Ethan. He finally understood. Robert hadn't been helping him. He had been using him. The next morning we returned to court. Robert was there. So was Ethan. The judge reviewed the new evidence. Then he looked directly at Ethan. "Mr. Carter, did you knowingly submit a false property document?" Ethan looked at me, then at the judge. "No, Your Honor." "Did you knowingly attempt to remove your mother from a property she legally owns?" Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I believed I was entitled to the property. That was not my question." Ethan lowered his head. "No." The judge continued. "Did your uncle tell you that the property would be sold after you obtained control?" "Yes." Robert suddenly stood. "That isn't true." The judge looked at him. "Mr. Robert Carter, you will have your opportunity to speak." Robert sat down. The judge examined the evidence again. Then he said something that made my entire body go still. "Mr. Carter." He wasn't speaking to Ethan. He was speaking to Robert. "I have one question for you." Robert looked up. The judge held up the forged document. "If you never had permission to sell this property, why did you already have a buyer waiting?" Robert's face went completely pale. Ethan turned toward him. I watched Robert carefully. He didn't answer, and that silence told us everything. But the judge wasn't finished. He ordered Robert to produce the communications with the supposed buyer. Within minutes, Robert's lawyer requested a recess. And that's when I realized the house wasn't the real secret. The real secret was who Robert had already promised it to. My attorney placed the recording on the table. The judge listened first. Then he asked for the courtroom to hear it. Robert's voice came through the speakers. "Once the court gives Ethan control of the property, the rest will be easy." I looked at my son. His face had gone completely pale. Then another voice spoke. "The buyer." "And the mother?" Robert answered without hesitation. "She'll have to leave." My chest tightened. I had spent weeks wondering why my own son had suddenly turned against me. Now I knew. Someone had planned it. Someone had convinced Ethan that the house was already his. Someone had been waiting for me to disappear from the property. The recording continued. The buyer asked, "And Ethan?" Robert laughed quietly. "He thinks he's getting the house. He isn't." Ethan looked at Robert in disbelief. "What did you just say?" Robert didn't respond. The recording continued. Robert explained that once the property was sold, Ethan would receive a small amount of money. The rest would go to Robert and the buyer. Ethan wouldn't even receive the amount he had been promised. My son lowered his head. I could see the shame on his face. The judge stopped the recording. He looked at Robert. "Is that your voice?" Robert said nothing. His attorney answered, "My client will not comment." The judge nodded. "Understood." Then he turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, did you ever hear this recording before today?" "No, Your Honor." "Did you know your uncle planned to sell the property?" "No." "Did you know he intended to keep most of the proceeds?" Ethan shook his head. "No." The judge looked at me, then at the documents, then at the recording. It was obvious where the case was going. My attorney requested that the lawsuit against me be dismissed. The judge agreed. But before announcing his decision, he said something I will never forget. "Mrs. Carter, you came into this courtroom believing your son wanted to take your home." I nodded. "That was understandable." He looked at Ethan. "But the evidence presented today suggests your son was manipulated into believing he was acting within his rights." Ethan looked at me. Tears were running down his face. "Mom, I'm sorry." I couldn't answer immediately. Too much had happened. Too many things had been said. Too much trust had been broken. But I knew one thing. I didn't want to leave the courtroom with hatred in my heart. I finally looked at him. "I forgive you." His face crumpled. "But forgiveness doesn't mean what happened didn't hurt." "I know. You should have trusted me." "I know. And next time someone tells you something about our family." He nodded. "I'll ask you first." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "Good." The judge officially dismissed Ethan's claim to the property. The fraudulent documents were referred for further investigation. Robert was ordered to surrender the financial records related to the proposed sale. The investment company's agreement was canceled, and the $50,000 payment was frozen while investigators examined where it came from. Outside the courtroom, Ethan stopped me. "Mom." I turned. He looked exhausted. "I don't expect you to forget." "I won't. I just hope one day you'll trust me again." I looked at my son. "You don't rebuild trust by asking for it." He nodded. "You rebuild it by earning it." "I will." Then he hugged me. For a moment, I felt like I was holding the little boy who used to run through the hallway of that house. Not the man who had taken me to court. My son. The same son who had made a terrible mistake. And I realized something. People sometimes make decisions out of fear. Sometimes they believe the wrong person. And sometimes, the people who love us can hurt us without realizing how deeply their choices affect us. But that doesn't mean every broken relationship has to stay broken. A few months later, the investigation was completed. Robert admitted his involvement. The forged documents were proven false. The proposed sale was permanently canceled, and the house remained mine. But I made one change. I added a new clause to my estate plan. The house would eventually belong to Ethan, but only if he understood one thing. It wasn't just a house. It was the place where his father had built a family. The place where his childhood memories lived. The place I had protected for decades. One evening, Ethan came over. We sat on the front porch. He looked around the house. "Dad would have hated all of this." I smiled. "He would have hated the lies." Ethan nodded. Then he said, "Mom, I thought I was fighting for my future." I looked at him. "You were." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You were just fighting for the wrong thing." He looked at the house. "I understand now." I squeezed his hand. "Good." The sun was setting behind the trees. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid of losing my home, because I finally understood something my husband had known all along. A home isn't protected by walls. It's protected by truth. And sometimes, the person standing across from you isn't really your enemy. Sometimes they're just someone who believed the wrong story. And sometimes all it takes is one honest question to expose the truth.